Hey Israel Story listeners, it's Mishi. Yesterday was Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, and our producer Mitch Ginsburg and I discussed the behind the scenes of our Signed, Sealed, Delivered project with Amanda Borschel-Dan on the Times of Israel's The Daily Briefing. Now, I encourage you all to subscribe to that wonderful podcast, but in the meantime, we thought we'd share their episode here, too. So, hope you enjoy it. And we'll be back early next week with yet another installment of Signed, Sealed, Delivered. We'll be right back.
A lot can happen in 3 years, like a chatbot may be your new best friend. But what won't change? Needing health insurance. United Healthcare Tri-Term Medical Plans, underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage that lasts nearly 3 years in some states. Learn more at uh1.com.
I know you care about the war in Israel right now, and you've been reading the headlines. Massacre in Gaza, genocide perpetrated by Hamas, no, by Israel. But if you've been following long enough, you know one thing. This stuff seems complicated, and honestly, no one can really just pick a side or decide an opinion without really learning, without really knowing what you're talking about. And that's why I wanted to tell you about this podcast. Check out Unpacking Israeli History, now in its 6th season. They have episodes with topics ranging from what is Hamas anyway, to whether Israel should ransom captured soldiers, and the history of Israel and its disengagement from Gaza in 2005. Unpacking Israeli History cuts through the noise and helps you understand Israel's present through understanding Israel's history. So, educate yourself. Learn the history behind the headlines. Find Unpacking Israeli History wherever you listen to your podcasts. With what seems like an endless amount of information at our fingertips, we tend to forget that wondering about things is really part of the journey to finding answers we're looking for. So, when it comes to the hot topics of Israel, Judaism, and Zionism, there's so much to wonder about right now that it's hard to know where to turn. Enter the latest weekly podcast from Unpacked, Wandering Jews with Michal and Noam. Join hosts and educator extraordinaires Michal Biton and Noam Weissman as they tackle these topics and the uncomfortable questions that surround them, with the goal of working towards the answers together with their listeners. No matter where you're from, if you've ever wondered about anything, this is the podcast for you. So check it out. Subscribe to Wandering Jews with Michal and Noam on your favorite podcast app today. Wandering Jews is brought to you by Unpacked, a division of Open Door Media.
Okay, we're back. Here is Amanda.
Hello and welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Today is Wednesday, April 26th, Independence Day here in Israel. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with the creator of Israel Story, the podcast, Mishi Harman, and Mitch Ginsburg, who is now part of the Israel Story team and formerly of the Times of Israel. Hi, Mishi. Hi, Mitch. And Chag Sameach.
Hi, Amanda. Chag Sameach.
Hi, Amanda.
Do either of you have any fun plans for today?
Go for it, Mitch.
Yeah, I have an annual get-together with some of my closest friends, my old army buddies. We all get together, all the families, and eat a lot, and drink a lot, and generally enjoy each other's company.
Yofi, how about you, Mishi?
Some nice tiulim with the family.
That's the best. And we, of course, are doing the traditional barbecue. Listeners, we have a special program today in which we'll bring you snippets of Israel Story's massive project called Signed, Sealed, Delivered that aims to dissect the Declaration of Independence from every possible angle. We hear from the descendants of several of the signatories who have very mixed reactions of how Israel has turned out. But before we dive in, Mishi, remind our listeners, what is Israel Story?
Sure. So first and foremost, we are part of the Times of Israel family and are very happy to be part of the Times of Israel family. Israel Story was the first large podcast in Israel. We started it 12 years ago in Hebrew called Sipur Israeli. It was a national radio show here. And today it's the most listened to Israeli and Jewish podcast in the world.
That's excellent. And Mitch has joined you this year, which I'm so happy to see Mitch here in the studio too.
We won the draft, the lottery draft. So we're lucky to have Mitch on our team now. And Mitch led this entire new series, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, together with Lev Cohen. And we'll talk about it in this episode.
Okay, so Mitch, you tell me, what prompted the idea?
Oh, well, I'll give credit where credit is due. Mishy came in one morning and said, I have a great idea that I want to discuss. So it really was his brainchild. And I immediately loved the idea. I mean, for me, it was fascinating. It has been fascinating doing it. And I had that sense from the beginning, just being able to sort of touch Israeli history and get a sense both of who the people were at the very beginning, the people who put their signatures to the Declaration of Independence, and, you know, who their descendants are, what they look like, what they think, how similar are they to the signatories. And we've discussed it together. It's something that in America you simply couldn't do just because so much time has passed. But here, as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of Israel, we can still touch the very beginning, the very genesis of Israeli history. So for us, it's been amazing.
And I'll just add to that about a year ago, we started thinking about what we wanted to do for Israel's 75th Yom Ha'atzmaut. And it's a really challenging task because Israel Story tries to remain apolitical and tries to stay out of a sort of partisan discourse about Israel. And it was sort of this situation of damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? Which is, if we do something which doesn't relate in any way to what's going on in Israel, we're obviously experiencing very dramatic and tumultuous times here, we will sort of seem out of touch. And if we do things about it, then we sort of, our mission kind of drifts a little bit. And we were trying to think how we could tackle this idea of Yom Ha'atzmaut, the 75th Yom Ha'atzmaut. And the truth of the matter is that we had this idea of the signatories long before the elections, and definitely long before the wave of demonstrations surrounding the judicial reform. And to our surprise, we're very bad at predictions usually, but to our surprise, this project has just become more and more relevant as time went on, because the Declaration of Independence has now emerged to be completely central and is at the forefront, really, of the conversation about the future nature or desired future nature of Israel. And we had started interviewing people, as I said before this, and, you know, as Mitch just mentioned, as a way to see what that group, that group of 37 signatories, where they are today. So the last one, Meir Vilner, died about 20 years ago. But out of the 37 signatories, 14 still have children who are alive, and the rest have grandchildren who are alive. And we wanted to see who are these people? Do they resemble their ancestors? Do they not? Have they shifted? Do they represent Israeli society more or less? And the interesting thing about the initial group of the 37 signatories is that though there were no non-Jews who signed the Declaration of Independence, and most notably no Arabs who signed the Declaration of Independence, the group of signatories from afar seems like a pretty monolith group of, Labor Party Poles and Ukrainians and Russian immigrants. But when you get close, it's a little bit like a pointillist painting. When you get close, you sort of start seeing a more granular picture. And you see that they actually were quite representative of the population, of the Jewish population. So there were revisionists, and there were communists, and there were kibbutznikim and moshavnikim and city folk, and there were charedim, and there were datim leumim, and there were atheists. There were 35 out of the 37 were Ashkenazim, 2 were Mizrahim, and 35 were men, and 2 were women. But if you take those two elements out, you see that it actually is quite a varied group. And we wanted to see who they are, who that group became a generation and a half or two later.
I'm so in awe of this huge, massive undertaking because those who listen to the Daily Briefing know that we record it in the morning and it comes out a few hours later. But as you said, Mishi, you started conceiving of this a year ago. So Mitch, can you tell us a little bit about how the project was actually undertaken?
Sure. So the first order of business was finding out a bit about the signatories themselves and then who their descendants are. And it was actually really fun journalistic work, tracking them down, finding the names, whether it be, some of them have social media presence, some of them don't. Some of them are listed on their landlines because they still have a landline of 144. Some of them aren't. Some of them live in Israel. Some of them don't. So it was a lot of work like that. We split the 37 signatories into groups, and we each tried to make contact with them. And then once we were able to establish contact, sometimes we called people and it was funny because they have the same name, but they're not related or all sorts of things like that. But in the end, we then went, generally speaking, we went to their home. Sometimes they came here to the studio, which was wonderful. And other times we went to see where they live and we visited them and we spoke with them, oftentimes at length and always including like a set of about 20 questions that we asked them all, but didn't restrict ourselves just to those questions.
And I should say that we set clear parameters for the project. So we said that we were going to look for the closest living relative. So wherever possible, we wanted to speak to a son or a daughter, we prefer many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence have many descendants, especially the Haredim, but not only. And we always preferred to talk to, so we had certain signatories for whom we had many, many options of people we could talk to. And we always tried to talk to people who knew them, who had experiences themselves, firsthand experiences with them. And it's difficult because on the one hand, 75 years is not that long. On the other hand, there are people who have been dead for 70 years or more. But still, we did try to, and I think almost all of the 37 people who we are featuring in this series did have first-person experiences and interactions with the signatories. Maybe there's a couple who didn't, of signatories who died in the early 50s and people aren't alive anymore. But we always tried to prefer people who could talk and tell us these stories of what it was like for the first finance minister of Israel, Eliezer Kaplan, who didn't like raisins, to take the raisins out of the challah and give it to his granddaughter, or, all these little anecdotes that bring these people out of the history books and into life.
The last thing I want to talk about before we start hearing some clips is the music. The soundtrack in all of your episodes in Israel Story is just brilliant always, but in these it feels like you've placed even more emphasis on the musical aspect. Who wants to talk about that?
I want to say that comment is music to my ears, Amanda. I can't believe you noticed. I'm excited that you did. We do. We discuss it at length, and we have a couple of people who have also been helping us. One person we refer to as DJ Yoni Turner, who's like a friend of both mine and Mishi's, who happens not to be a DJ and is a doctor, but is very knowledgeable about music, Hebrew music. And so we ask him, and Tomer Kariv also has been advising us on music, and he'll listen to the episode and put forth a few suggestions, and then we'll bat them around and discuss and try and find a song that dovetails with the episode or reflects it in a way that's interesting and compelling, and hopefully even to people who listen in English, they'll enjoy the Hebrew song.
And I think that's a really important point, because it was we wanted to make sure that this what didn't end up being a very, very long project of people being in favor or not in favor of the judicial reform and of Bibi. So in going into these interviews, we did try to think about what angle that particular signatory and their descendants could talk about. So if it's, Rachel Cohen Kagan, who was one of only two women who signed the Declaration of Independence and was really the sort of most ardent feminist and representative of women's rights, we wanted to make sure that that was the aspect that sort of came through in the episode that we did about her. Or if it's about the breakdown of the kibbutz movement, or it's about Israel shifting from a largely socialist welfare state to a hyper-capitalist state. In an episode that we're releasing next week about the aliyot of Mizrahim, and so it's an episode with the Yemenite signatory of the Declaration of Independence. So in each episode we tried to think about new angles that won't just replicate the discourse, and the music is a big part of that.
Okay, so let's start with the episode examining David Ben-Gurion. Now, listeners, this is a good time to state that some of these snippets have, shall we say, adult language and definitely strong statements about certain segments of Israeli society. So keep that in mind as you continue to listen. Who are we hearing speaking in this clip? Who is this person?
So the person we're hearing is Dr. Yariv Ben Eliezer, who is Ben-Gurion's eldest grandson, and he's the grandson that Ben-Gurion was closest to. And in fact, probably the family member that Ben-Gurion was closest to. In the 50s, Ben-Gurion used to pen these anonymous op-eds in Davar. And since he was prime minister and didn't want to be signing the op-eds as David Ben-Gurion, he used to sign these op-eds, Saba Shel Yariv. And this is Yariv. He's a professor of communications. He himself is now in his 80s. And as you'll hear, he has a lot of very strong opinions about Israel and about the direction in which we're going.
Let's hear it now.
He was very realistic. He had vision. He was like a prophet in this case.
מדינת ישראל תהא מושתתת על יסודות החירות, הצדק והשלום לאור חזונם של נביאי ישראל.
I remember very well the last chapter. He wrote it, not just signed it. It says, Israel will take care of equality between people based on age, gender, ethnicity, nationality. You see, he believed that Israel would be an example to the other nations. And the people of Israel will be what he called Am Sgula. And this is not. Israel became now a state of apartheid. It was a vision that went down the drain. This is not the dream of the beginners of Israel, and it was not the dream of my grandfather. It's a nightmare. Half of the people will go to the army, and half of the people will study Torah. Fuck! I don't want it. I have grandchildren. They're going to the army. Fight for what? For the Hasidic who is sitting, masturbating and getting money from my taxes? This is not the people I want to live with. When I see what's happening in Israel, I'm so proud of my grandfather and sad for him. I'm glad that he didn't see that troubled country now. I'm glad that he can't see that. He would have killed him.
I almost left this clip till the end because it is so depressing. Did you find it depressing, Mitch?
It's a good question. That wasn't how I experienced it. I found it extremely provocative. I found it interesting in terms of who he is and what kind of strong emotions he has. And I found it shocking, I guess, in many ways, but it didn't leave me feeling depressed.
I'll just add to that I think that these are not opinions that we don't hear. These are opinions that are very much present in the discourse in Israel and about Israel. I think the unique element here is that we're hearing it from Ben-Gurion's grandson. And then one can ask, is that actually meaningful. I mean, he is also, yes, it is true that he is Ben Gurion's grandson, but he is also just another voice within Israeli society. We did receive a lot of shocked and angry comments about that. I mean, there are two separate things here. One is that he, to a certain extent, he's a little bit vulgar, but the sort of more meaningful thing is that he thinks that we have lost our way, and it's interesting to think about whether that's an opinion that his grandfather would have shared, and I think it's a troubling thought for sure, because we sort of have this expectation of, especially Ben Gurion, who of all the signatories of the Declaration of Independence, and as we say at the outset of the episode about him, is, the most famous and well-known Jew since Moses or something like that, you sort of expect to hear a different kind of take on Israel. But I found it quite refreshing, to be honest.
What we really, really tried to do is just take the essence of what they said and present it in the most honest way possible. So if when we spoke with, say, and this is, you haven't heard this yet, but let's say the head of the Agudat Yisrael party at the time, who was the senior Haredi representative who signed the Declaration of Independence, he feels that the study of Torah is the single most important thing to the country's well-being. And there are those who certainly disagree, but it was important for us to present that because that is his truth. And so it was the same thing for Ben Gurion. I know it's very provocative, some of the things he says, but what we try to do is just present it in a way that best reflects who he is as Ben Gurion's oldest grandson.
The next and final clip we'll hear is about Zerach or Zorach Warhaftig from his son Immanuel. During World War II, he very famously helped save thousands of Jews from the Holocaust. He was the longtime leader of the National Religious Party and longtime Minister of Religious Affairs who set the policy on many matters that we're still dealing with today. So let's hear what his son Immanuel has to say.
My father saw the Declaration of Independence as the closing of a circle which started with saving the Jews in 1940. There, my father saved the Jews from the physical point of view. In 1948, my father gave them the spiritual future, the way how to live and be part of the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. To sign it was a very exciting, thrilling thing, because my father for many nights was dreaming how he will write his signature on the Declaration of Independence. I can translate to you what my father told about that moment. I signed with a firm hand, a beating heart, beating from joy. I think that we can look at the Declaration of Independence as a very important text fulfilled in a big part. We started with 650,000 Jews in 1948, and now we are more than 8 million Jews. I think that that is the most important source of joy for my father. And of course, the strength of the religious community, the Limud Torah, the Yeshivot, the Ulpanot, and all this also is a source of pride.
Now, Mishi, in other parts of the episode, Immanuel says that his father would have basically supported the judicial overhaul and today's government. Did that surprise you at all?
No, it did not surprise me. There are many people in Israel who support the judicial reform, and it's not surprising that the descendants of the Declaration of Independence, some of them also do. As I said at the beginning, there were not only religious signatories, but also right-wing signatories, revisionists. It was important to Ben Gurion that that Moetzet Ha'am, the sort of pre-state legislator that whose members are the ones who signed the Declaration of Independence, also really represent the population. So obviously it was skewed, and obviously it wasn't a full representation, but there were right wingers and there were religious folks, and also there are people whose opinions don't match up to their ancestors' opinions today. What is interesting is that we saw that while there are sort of outliers on the edges from people who talk about Israel as a Judeo-Nazi country, Yariv Ben Eliezer actually isn't the most radical voice that we feature in this series. So from people talking about Israel as a Judeo-Nazi country, all the way to people saying that democracy is not a Jewish value and they don't understand why we even strive to talk about Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. But it is interesting, and this is something that we discuss a lot in our editorial meetings, it is interesting to see that the vast majority of the people that we're talking to, and we've talked to something on the order of 50 descendants, because some of the signatories, we interviewed multiple descendants. It is interesting that the vast majority are within what we would call the Israeli center and center left. I would say sort of from Meretz to Gantz, more or less politically. We are seeing very few, while there are a lot of right-wingers, we're seeing very few Bibistim, as they're called. And in some ways that's surprising to me. In other ways it's not surprising given who the initial group of signers was. But it doesn't surprise me that there are people who support the judicial reform. And it was also important for us to juxtapose those opinions. So, for example, the Verhaftig episode came right after the Ben Gurion episode, because we did want to show that there is quite a interesting variation.
Mitch, did anything surprise you coming out from the interviews that were done for this series?
I was surprised every time. It was just wonderful for me sometimes just hear like the little anecdotes and the little stories that kind of make the history come alive. Because I've heard Ben Gurion declaring Israel's independence, on May 14, 1948 many times. But to know that, for instance, Nahum Nir, who was one of the signatories, was waylaid along with the future cabinet secretary on the way to the signing in the afternoon of Friday by a police officer, and had to talk his way out of a ticket by saying that he's holding the little piece of parchment that's going to be signed, and that the police officer ought to let him go, or hearing from one of the revisionists that Herzl Rosenblum was his name, that at the last second, Ben Gurion came over to him and said sharply in his ear, "You sign it, Vardy," because he wanted more Hebrew names, or I don't know if there were other reasons as well, maybe a bit of an agenda against his own ideology, but that the man said he was overcome at the moment, and he regretted it later for most of his days that he'd signed a name that nobody knows him by. And so for years, nobody knew who this Vardy was on the piece of parchment.
Another real treat that we experienced while working on this is that we got to actually see the Declaration of Independence, Mitch and I, though its image is so iconic and is in every classroom and in every governmental office, and now in Chadrei Ochel of kibbutzim and on the municipality building of Tel Aviv, and there's replicas everywhere. And I think actually it was even added to the Haaretz newspaper this weekend as a supplement. So I mean, it's really all over the place and completely ubiquitous. But the declaration itself is very, very strictly guarded and is something that very few people get to see. And Mitch and Lev basically badgered the Israel State Archives for several months till we got to see the declaration, and it was quite an experience. We sat in the room with the declaration and with the head archivist for a couple of hours, talking about it and looking at it, and it's interesting to sort of see the physical artifact itself.
They even left me and Mishy in the room alone with it. We got to cart it from room to room when it needed to be moved. It's kept in a special case that the Israel Museum had built for the Megillah for its preservation. and it is housed in in the sort of building that you really wouldn't imagine is the building in which the Israeli Declaration of Independence is kept. It's sort of like a nondescript industrial building at the far edges of Talpiot.
And there's something kind of interesting and symbolic about the fact that it's both within plain sight and completely hidden from the public, because there's something about the nature and about the text of the declaration, which is also that way. So one of the projects that we did as part of this Science Field Delivered series is that we went out to the street and asked people where they think the idea of a Jewish and democratic state comes from. And most people, more than 90%, think that that idea comes from the Declaration of Independence. And yet, of course, the word democracy is not mentioned in the Declaration of Independence.
Mishi, Mitch, thank you so much for joining me today. This is really a History Nerds' greatest dream, this series, and I look forward to listening to future episodes. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda.
My father, I really saw him very little because he was imprisoned by the British, what they called Jewish terrorists. And my father signed this Declaration
of Independence.
Declaration of Independence.
To sign it was a very exciting thing.
I am the grandson of the person who signed 10th in the Megillat Ha'atzmaut.
John Hancock on the Israeli Declaration of Independence in terms of size is Ben-Gurion's. But my grandfather's is the one that stands out most.
My grandfather didn't marry women. Women married my grandfather.
When I was coming home from school, he was there for me. We had 5 o'clock tea.
When I played with my friends in the yard on Shabbos, I remember my father calling me to come up and study with him the Gemara, the Talmud.
He had a beautiful tenor voice. He sang beautifully. My father looked at all our homework. He always looked at everything we did.
He brought 2 eggs back with him from the signing. And she said, this is the best thing that came out of the declaration.
You can see the roots of the fascism we are living today in this document.
But I think he would have been very proud of the democratic character of Israel.
במגילת העצמאות לא כתוב אפילו פעם אחת דמוקרטיה.
My father thought that we will have to give back Judea and Samaria. But we were one of the early settlers.
He never thought that we'll be in a situation like this.
The religious people try to force their religion.
We are dealing in lies.
My father will be proud that Israel is Israel.
I don't know if he would have been so happy with them. No, I don't think so.
Our democracy is in trouble.
Now that there is a right-wing government, I'm very happy.
And if he was here, he will be ashamed.
He would have been annoyed by the fact that in his neighborhood, Rehavia, there are so many Haredi Jews.
The choice will be between losing the Jewish majority.
The danger right now is very great.
The country is beautiful.
Or justifying the accusations that we're an apartheid state.
The people of Israel are shit.
I'm sorry that I fought for a country that is not what he wanted.
There is, I think, a self-hatred.
Israel became now the state of apartheid.
This is our country, and we have the right to be here like any other people in the world.
My father is very happy to see the religious aspects of Israel today.
It was a vision that went down the drain.
Israel Story's new series, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, is coming your way.
לפיכך נתכנסנו אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל.
Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. Ad-free listening is available on Amazon Music for all the music plus top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/news ad free. That's amazon.com/news ad free to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.